Oftentimes in the health space, we look for a diagnosis or a label. Sometimes it's easier to have labels so then we know what we need to do. But sometimes labels are debilitating where we then use it as a band-aid to then just take certain medications or do certain things to just subsist in a sense. In this conversation, we talk about the diagnosis of autism, what it looks like, what it did to this family, and if it really was even autism. I now eat a lot of meat, and so do they. If you want to thrive, you need to eat meat. Meat is required. Hey guys, my name is Judy Cho and I'm board certified in holistic nutrition. And I have a private functional medicine practice where we focus on root cause healing, and it often starts with the Carnivore Cures all meat elimination diet. Today I had the pleasure of sitting down with Cristina Greenfield. She is the founder of Conscious Healthy Homes, but we talk a lot about her own health journey and her family's health journey, labels that they were given, illnesses that they suffered from, and just a heartfelt story that while it's painful while they were going through it, it has empowered them to live a life that maybe is more meaningful, more healthy, and has given them a passion to do good in this world. Christina's daughter was struggling with illness, and then she was labeled with autism. Whether it's autism, whether it's some type of illness, Cristina wanted to get to root cause of why her daughter was suffering. And she learned a lot along the way. I hope that this conversation gives you empowerment of no matter what illness you're suffering from, you're struggling with, that you find ways to keep the symptoms of the illness at bay or get to root cause healing of maybe making the symptoms never come back. I know that's a big, tall order, and sometimes that's not possible. But if we can find solutions that are more root cause healing, that gives us answers to the why it happened, why it's going on, and so that maybe we can ultimately have our full health back and live the lives that we were meant to. Let's get right into the interview. Hi, Cristina. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited for people to hear your story, hear your family's story, and what you're up to now. But for the people that may not have heard of you, if you can introduce yourself to the people that are listening and watching.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to talk to you. It's been a long time. It's been since December that I've seen you, so I'm pumped to be talking to you again. But yeah, for people that don't know me, my name is Cristina Greenfield. I'm the founder of a company called Conscious Healthy Home. And I founded this company as a result of my family's exposure to toxic mold. And I basically became the advocate and the guide that I was looking for that would have been so helpful for us when we were trying to navigate something that we didn't understand and caused such great impacts to us physically, mentally, emotionally, financially. So yeah, that's why I started this company to kind of be the answer that I needed.
Okay. And that makes so much sense. I think a lot of people with their pain, then it becomes a passion, including my own journey. I'll
Yeah,
talk.
very similar. Yeah.
Yes, I want to talk a lot more about your company and what you do and tips for people that are walking your journey now. But before we get there, if we can talk a little bit about your daughter, the story of what happened, how there was a possible misdiagnosis, but I'm curious if you can share.
Absolutely. Yeah. We tell our daughter that she saved our family. Because I think like many well, I don't know. I don't know if it's many people, but it was certainly my experience that once you become a mother, you put everything about yourself to the side and it all becomes kind of about your children and the whole focus, becomes about them. And so our daughter, at the time we moved into this home, she was the only child. She was about 2.5. She was meeting all developmental milestones. And then it seemed like out of nowhere, she stopped meeting those developmental milestones. And not only did she stop, she regressed, and so where she was talking, she was speaking. After a while, she stopped. We didn't know much about autism at the time, so I didn't realize this until hindsight, but she started engaging in what they call echolalia. So that just means that they're like repeating things over and over again, sometimes out of context, things that don't make sense, But I was like, well, I was counting all the words in the sentence. For example, and I can't remember exactly what the phrase is she used to say, but it was from a cartoon called Finding Nemo. And she said it, it was very clearly, and it was like this whole sentence. And so I was like, oh, that's like 10 words, And so I'm like counting all the words that she's saying and things, but it never made sense. It was never in context. She would just say phrases and things. So this is called echolalia. She started stimming, like her stem was like flapping. She would flap her arms a lot when she got excited or nervous or upset. And then because she started losing her words and stopped talking, stopped speaking, she really became so frustrated all the time. And so it was like, she would try to communicate something and it was just like she couldn't get it out and she would be so frustrated. So she would have huge, huge temper tantrums, huge fits. And especially if it was a place that was, incredibly dysregulating, we couldn't go to what you would consider typical places that you could go with a 2.5-year-old, places that seem fun, but like Chuck E. Cheese, those types of places, you're like a nightmare, sensory overload for her, but we didn't know that. And she couldn't communicate that. And so she was at a little Montessori school at the time, and her teachers started kind of flagging things for us. They were like, when we're doing circle time, she doesn't want to participate. She wants to go off on her own. She doesn't seem to want to play with her friends. She wants to be on her own again. She's not really speaking as much as the other children are. She's having more difficulty potty training than the other children. And then, we would tell our teacher, well, she doesn't sleep at night, because she wouldn't sleep. She would wake up every night. And it wasn't just that she woke up and was restless. She would wake up screaming like she was in pain. And so everybody was exhausted, because we're not sleeping, she's not sleeping. My husband and I both work full-time jobs. And so it's just a downward spiral. And so then the teachers say, there's an educational diagnostician that came to the school. And they said, we can't diagnose her with autism, but we can say that from an educational perspective, it sort of, looks like that. And so you should go pursue a diagnosis. And at that time I was shocked. I was like, what do you, yeah, she's our only child. So we also didn't know, didn't have anything to kind of compare it to, but we were shocked and kind of in disbelief because first of all, we were ignorant to what is the spectrum of autism. We didn't know anything about it. We just knew, sort of ignorantly what we had seen here and there, not anything about the spectrum. So, I'm thinking, I don't know what this means for her life when they start saying that, they start giving her this label. So we go to Texas Children's, the developmental pediatricians, to pursue, what I think is they're going to rule this out, and she's just because she had been called spirited. She's a very spirited child, in the Montessori setting, they don't put anybody in boxes. And so she's very spirited, she knows what she wants. She just has trouble communicating it. She's all the things that just means she's like a high touch child. Like, she's got a lot of needs and she's got a lot of opinions. And then, me knowing myself, I thought, well, she comes by that naturally. That's all very normal. She gets that from me, but it's still, I wasn't ready to accept that there was a diagnosis. But we go to the developmental pediatrician, and within the span of, I don't remember it, I feel like I blacked out in that period because I went alone. I had another child before that, so my husband was home with the baby, and I took my daughter, and I thought it would be like an iteration, like there would be many different meetings, many different times where they would observe her and things, and that, through the course of this, we would rule it out. Well, I was wrong because in the span of just a few hours, the doctor, definitively said, well, and if I remember correctly, it felt like a bunch of boxes that they were checking. She displays this behavior, she displays that behavior to this degree and with this frequency. And so magically, now she has received an autism diagnosis in just a few hours, again, just shock. I had to call my husband and tell him, like we have an official diagnosis, and we don't know what it means, and we don't know what it means for her life, and why is this happening, and where did this come from? Because what I kept telling the doctors, and nobody would listen, her regular pediatricians, I kept saying she was meeting her developmental milestones. She really was, because her being my first child and me not being naturally very maternal is what I felt. I had a spreadsheet. And so I was tracking, when she was meeting her developmental milestones, and suddenly she wasn't. And they were like, well, you just missed it, Mom. Like, you just missed it. Sometimes it happens. Sometimes kids regress. Sometimes they're just not actually meeting it, and you just think that they are. And so for years we sat in this diagnosis and just tried to figure out, after we got through the shock of it, we kind of came to terms of just, well, we just need to learn how to support her. It's an educational journey for all of us. We need to learn what triggers her. What is she trying to say? How can we help her communicate if she can't find the words? What settings can we put her in that will challenge her, but also meet her where she is? And so we went through, we were in physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy. We're doing all the therapies. We're still, nobody's sleeping at night, and nothing seems to be working. And finally, I end up finding a functional medicine doctor who, I think it was that she specializes in helping kind of meet some of what can sometimes be deficiencies, like from a nutritional perspective for children that are on the spectrum. And I was like, okay, but I just need a doctor who speaks the language of, if it is true that my child is autistic, I need somebody who specializes in this so that she can teach me what to do and how to support her. Well, we go to her and I tell her the same thing that I've been telling everyone for years, because at this point we've been in this house now almost 4 years and dealing with the diagnosis the whole time. And she listens and she asks me questions. She doesn't just dismiss me. She doesn't just say you missed it, like sorry for being a bad mom. She listens and she says, well, what changed? What happened right before you started to notice this regression? And I was like, nothing happened, because it's not triggering to me. It's not registering because it's a beautiful home that we live in. It was what we thought was our forever home, ideal home, beautiful neighborhood, cul-de-sac, all the things that we thought was important to us at the time. And she ends up leading us down the path to us figuring out, we through a course of testing and investigating the home because there was mold in the home, toxic mold, but we couldn't see it and we couldn't smell it. And it didn't seem to us that anyone was having any symptoms, except for obviously my daughter with the regression, but I didn't tie it together because at the time nobody asked me what happened, like what was the source of this. It was just your child is, not a question of why or what could have happened or what may have triggered. So when she asked us this question, she's the first one, and my husband and I kind of thought, what is this? Because no doctor in our whole life had ever asked us any questions relating to our environment. It was all very, we grew up in the kind of the diagnostic model, right? It's just you get a diagnosis and you get a prescription, diagnosis and a prescription, and this is how it goes. And so this way of practice was completely foreign to us. But because we were so desperate, we were willing to try anything. So with that doctor asking those questions, we looked at our home, figured out that we had high levels of toxic mold to the point where we should not have been living there, even though we're looking around saying it's the most beautiful, expensive home we'd ever had or built or been in. But we're looking at our daughter and saying she's really struggling. And it wasn't just that she was uncomfortable or that we were uncomfortable with the diagnosis. It seemed that she was in pain, like she was like locked inside. She couldn't communicate. She was chronically constipated. She couldn't sleep. Like she didn't barely eat. She hated going places that, seems like kids would like to go, so it was just to us, we were like, she's unhappy. So we figured out through testing the home that the toxic mold was in the home, and then supported that with functional medicine testing. So there was genetic testing that confirmed that not only does she have a gene that makes her highly susceptible to mold, but she has a genetic mutation that didn't really allow her body to detox toxins the way that it should. And then through blood work, determined that she was indeed highly inflamed everywhere. She had chronic inflammatory response syndrome, CIRS, and it was impacting her gut, it was impacting her body, it was impacting her brain. And so, of course, she couldn't talk. Of course, she had a hard time learning new things. Of course, she was screaming all the time and couldn't sleep. So all of these things finally started making sense. And then after, she had all these symptoms, but my husband and I, just intuitively were like, well, genetics, it takes two, right? So one of us is the culprit, of like bringing these genetics to her. And actually, we ended up finding out we both share those genes. So our entire family of four, looking back now, we see the variety of symptoms that we all experienced. None of them as obvious as my oldest daughter, but because we were her advocate, she was able to save the rest of us, because had it just been my anxiety, depression, what I thought was postpartum, hair loss, weight gain, hormonal ups and downs, all of the things that's just like, oh, well, you're a lawyer, you're a mom, and you're all these things. And so, of course, this is just how your life is. This is just how you experience life, and it sucks for you, right? That would have been how I would have experienced life had it not, I would not have fought for my life the way that I fought for hers. So, we'd always tell her, we're like, you saved our family, because by helping her, we were able to help all the rest of us who were also struggling, just in different ways.
Yeah, I'll let you pause for a second. Thank you
Thanks.
so much for sharing that. I can totally relate on so many levels. I think as a mom, we want to do the best we can, and sometimes we don't get the answers, and then it's confusing. And going to all of those different doctors, it must have been frustrating because you're not getting answers of there's no solution, but just here's all the band-aids you can try to
Yeah,
help your daughter. But in the grand scheme of things, this answer has really helped a lot of you because
yeah,
standard care does, like you said, it's, oh, you're depressed. That's very common. Like you said, you have two children, you have a busy career. And so, therefore, yeah, just get on a pill. And that's
hmm,
exactly what I went through too, thinking that I had postpartum. But I think a lot of it was my diet. I think there was some parts of it was my environment too. And I moved. So I will never know if that was a component of it. But thank you for sharing your story. So then what happened once you went to the functional medicine doctor? I'm assuming you fixed your home, but then how did you guys treat your daughter?
We did, yeah. The fixing the home piece was what started me in this side company. We can get to that, but focusing on my daughter. So first, we knew, it's a really interesting. If any of your listeners have been through a mold experience or mold exposure, and if that is triggering, I would just say, maybe pause this. Because this part is the raw piece, is when you're confused and you're desperate and you're financially strapped and you're trying to decide, do my resources go to fixing my home? Because you find out quickly, depending on the source of the mold, you might find out that like insurance is not going to cover it.
Right.
And so, there's a financial strain there, right? But then you're looking at your child or your loved one who needs support. And these things are not free. And oftentimes the doctors that are highly skilled in treating patients and helping figure out sort of their personal puzzle to eliminating toxins, whatever those toxins are, also don't take insurance. So it's financially challenging. And then you're watching your children, what it feels like, suffer. And so emotionally challenging, right? We had to do both. We focused our resources on our oldest daughter because she was the one who was most, what we could tell, impacted. And we just dove deep into the functional medicine journey. And really, we were so blessed. I think the doctor that we found was she was the first angel in our story, because she was so patient with us. Again, for us not understanding and learning the functional medicine way of practicing, we were very ignorant and probably a lot of our expectations and questions that we asked. But she was so patient with us. And willing to support us and she still does. She meets us very much where we are because there's ebbs and flows in the healing journey, right? And so part of the process was first figuring out, what is my daughter actually dealing with, what level of inflammation, what are the symptoms that the inflammation is causing, and then how can we reduce that inflammation, whether that's by diet. So one of the first things that we eliminated was all gluten and dairy, and not because she's celiac, but because those, as you know, are highly inflammatory, can be highly inflammatory to some people, depending on what other toxic burden that they have. And so once we eliminated that, she started to make some progress. She started to sleep through the night. She started to say more words, and the fog started lifting from behind her eyes, and we started kind of seeing her come back. And simultaneously with that, we left the home. Once we figured out that the home was one of the primary sources of that toxicity, we just left and never went back. Now, I mean, my husband and I went back because obviously we had things to do. We had to clean out the house. We had to go through remediation and all that. But the children, they never went back. We stayed with my parents for a while, which is an incredibly humbling experience. How old were we? We were in our late 30s. So we should have been in a point of time where we were very successful and independent, and we found ourselves functionally homeless, with two children in tow. So that was humbling from a lot. But at that point, like, your ego, like, what do you have to lose? So we left. We started seeing that progress through changes in diet, and then also trying to focus on how is her body eliminating. So really honed in on the fact that she was chronically constipated. So everything is just getting blocked up in there, and she's had the leaky gut, and it's happening in your gut, it's happening in your brain. So we're starting to make all these connections as we're learning about how the body works, and not just any body, her body. And then also a lot of supplements, lots and lots of supplements at that time, which we've pulled back from as, again, we're learning more and making it sustainable and things. And so it was all God, actually. But we did our part in listening and learning. When he put, I always sort of describe that it's like he put these like stepping stones in front of us, and it was literally just one at a time. And we're like blindly, reaching for the next stepping stone, but he's always got us. That it was always there, when our foot met the ground. It's absolutely incredible to look back and just to see who were those stepping stones and how he strategically placed them in our lives, and how we were ready to receive the information that those people, those angels, were ready to give us. Because had any of those things happened out of sync, we wouldn't have been prepared to digest what exactly was ahead of us, which was, for us, and again, this is not the path for everyone, but for us, not exactly knowing how to handle our home environment we left, we never went back, and we got rid of almost everything that we owned. We weren't working with anybody who could help us really parse through whether or not we needed to do that or whether or not that was overkill. But at the time, my husband and I, we were basically on the verge of divorce at that time because, again, both of us were struggling with inflammation. Both of us were having all of these symptoms. And so we had many, many clashes. But we agreed in that moment to kind of take the nuclear option with respect to our home and our family. And just for the chance of maybe being able to help our daughter if it was true. And like, who in their right mind does that? Like, no, I think that's kind of the beauty of it looking back is that we weren't in our logical mind. We were desperate but also hopeful. And so it was faith. We just took a leap of faith and we did this. And within about 3 months, we started seeing a real change in her where, it wasn't just, sometimes when you're looking for a positive change, you sort of doubt, like, am I seeing what I want to see or is it really a change, But about 3 months, other people outside of just my husband and I were noticing my daughter's improvements. And progressively today, she's in school with all neurotypical peers. She is, she is maybe about a grade behind, but we also tried some alternative schools in that, in the meantime and stuff. And so we're just trying to kind of figure out what works best for her. But she has had the autism diagnosis removed. Not that that was ever our goal, just that once we were able to eliminate what was causing the inflammation, and then the inflammation eliminated the symptoms. And then because she didn't have that symptomatology, she no longer qualified for that diagnosis. And so she sleeps well, she speaks, she looks at me, she says, "Mommy, I love you." She looks at me and she says mean things too, you know. But she's able to express herself in all versions of herself. And my husband and I sometimes look at each other when she's talking, a lot, like without taking a breath, and we're just like, we prayed for this, It's such a gift. It's such an incredible gift, and it really opened all of our eyes to how much our environment and our choices for foods and what we put in our body, snacks, drinks, all that, how all of that can accumulate depending on what your body is and is not able to eliminate, and it's sort of like garbage in. And if your body can't get the garbage out, then what is that going to do to your systems?
Well, thank you. Thank you again for sharing all of that. The studies show that autism has increased. I think it's like 1 in 31 now. And I had Dr. Peter McCullough on not too long ago, and he shared that the four main risks of autism is, I think it's one, it's like familial history. So somebody in your family had autism.
Mhm.
I think another one is the age of the parents, which it doesn't sound like you guys were older at all. And then the other one was any febrile seizures. So when the child was a baby, there's signs of that. And then the last one is some type of chemical exposure. So I don't know if
Mm.
you would consider mold in that. I don't think he knows a ton about that, but just some type of exposures.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, now that you have, removed that label from your daughter, and I totally can relate to the labeling because I would go into my psychiatrist or therapist and say, and they would ask me such pointed questions that sometimes I was like, that's how you're defining how I'm sick. It's how many
Mm.
times do you go through a binge or how many times do you go through a purge, and just that alone. And
Yeah.
depending on a certain number, oh, you need to get hospitalized yesterday. And so
Right.
I just thought that is such a bizarre way. And of course but I just wanted to get better. So I went through that anyway. But so I'm curious what your thoughts are now, having lived all of that. Could it be that some of the labeling of autism is not really autism? Could it be one other thing he brought up was sometimes it could be vaccine injuries from
Mm.
having too many vaccines in one period.
Yeah.
But could it be that it's maybe not autism and it's just not just, but it's maybe the environment, maybe
Something else.
something else is sick. And if we remove that, that these kids or people that are labeled these things can actually get better. Hey guys, just a really quick break. Nutrition with Judy's private practice is now called Empower Functional Health. I started as a nutritional therapist, but we have become much more all-encompassing. At Empower Functional Health, we do functional medicine, chronic illness, autoimmune, gut health, environmental illness such as CIRS, mold illness, Lyme. Regardless of all these names, the goal for us is always to get you root cause healing answers. And of course, carnivore, the all meat elimination diet is always on the table. Food, the right food, is always medicine. We offer functional tests, prescription meds, and really everything to get you closer to root cause, where you can just eat the meats you enjoy and live the life that you are meant to symptom-free. The goal is to get off meds, supplements, and everything else that your body no longer needs support in. Our practice, whether it's Nutrition with Judy, sharing podcasts and free content, or our private practice, Empower Functional Health, our goal is to support you guys in the barbell theory. We give a lot of free content, our evidence-based research. We don't use Substack. We give all our stuff away for free. We interview with the best and make it super tactical, so you have clinical pearls that you can walk away with and try in your own healing journey. And then we work with some people in a smaller subset, one-on-one, to provide that level of personalized care. And as we heal these people that are chronically ill, we find these clinical pearls and golden nuggets that we can share then more publicly so that we can make wellness for all. Hopefully, the content and the guides and the free stuff we give out is enough for you to heal. But if it's not, you can always come and work with us in our private practice so that you can get more personalized care. If you want to learn more, make sure to check out empowerfunctionalhealth.com.
I'll give you the lawyer answer.
Okay.
I think it depends. I think it really depends, and I think what it depends on are the words. It's the verbiage. It's the language. It's the language behind our medical system and how we diagnose. Again, based on these checklists, which I don't purport to have a better way, but I would probably ask more source related questions, because I'm sure that some people do experience what qualifies as autism, 100% genetically. And maybe if they made these changes to their environment, maybe it wouldn't improve the symptoms that they experience. And so I think that if I could go back in time and somebody, we did all of this and somebody gave her that label, gave her that diagnosis, or she earned it because of her symptoms, I would do what the last doctor did and ask that source related question. And it's probably a distinction too between did they actually meet those developmental milestones, or was it a regression? Because I don't think that's a thread that anybody ever pulled through for me until I was talking to our functional medicine doctor and she was making that distinction, because I was just like, to me, the conversations before that were just, oh, you missed it, versus, wait a minute, did you not miss it and did she regress? Now here's a whole other set of questions to try to find the source, because to me that might indicate a child who never met the milestones. Perhaps they do have a true from birth developmental delay versus somebody who was actually meeting the milestones, truly have a spreadsheet to back it up, and then question, well, what happened? What happened to make your body stop? Because that's not the typical course of development. So I think it depends. And then, just from relieving ourselves of ignorance in pursuit of answers for our daughter about what is autism, what is the spectrum. I mean, sometimes we look at ourselves and we're like, I don't know, maybe we are on the spectrum. I mean, we've got some things that could qualify. I don't like a whole lot of noise, and I've never liked the tags in my clothes. There's some probably sensory sensitivities and things, and this is just like everything, right? When you educate yourself on it, you relieve yourself from fear. Originally, we were so fearful of this label because I didn't know what it meant. And I didn't know what the possibilities were, and I didn't know what they were saying about her or what her future would look like or could look like, or whose fault this was. What did we do to cause this? I didn't know any of those questions, or if those were even the right questions to ask. But once you educate yourself on what it is, and if now that I simply understand it, and maybe ignorantly understand it as a set of symptoms, I'm not as fearful, because if I see those symptoms, I have the opportunity to try to ask questions and figure out what are the source of those symptoms. And if I can figure out the source, and if I can figure out how to relieve them, then maybe I can bring some relief to my child,
Yeah, no, totally. I think that sometimes labeling things gives you the assurance of, okay, so now I know what I need to go after and heal, right? So
Yeah.
CIRS in a sense is a label. So if
Yeah.
you have CIRS, then now you know that you have this gene susceptibility to mold illness or biotoxin illness. And then now you could do these steps. But I also think that these labels can also be a detriment where it's like, oh no, I act this way or I am this way because I have this label.
Yeah.
And I could tell you so many what's so interesting of everything you shared and what I just connected with Dr. McCullough saying that one factor is the genetic component. But how do
Mm.
we not know if CIRS is also a genetic component, right? So we have these genes that are susceptible to not reducing inflammation in the right way. So we don't really detox properly. We don't have the messengers to get the immune system to work properly. So if that
Hmm.
is a genetic component that we have, and then some people are more susceptible to mold illness, then could it be that some of these people that are then getting labeled as autistic are actually suffering from mold illness or that CIRS gene susceptibility and it's just been triggered with that child or or and maybe there are signs from the parents but they're not fully sick yet or it's not fully turned on and so with the child that has the gene now it's fully turned on and so
Yeah.
I just think there are a lot more questions than just saying okay we have a label and so now we will just sort of function based on those labels because I
Yeah.
think had you not run into your functional medicine doctor you may not be where you are today. That's
Oh, 100%. We wouldn't be because we would have been in that same hamster wheel of the traditional, medical system, which has its place. There is a value, in that, but not it. We found outside the answers that we needed were outside of that system. Thank God for that discovery because yeah, I think you're exactly right. You hit the nail on the head, and that's how I feel about it. Was great and relieving that we had some answers so that we could say, okay, these are some of the therapies that we could do. And then when we got the CIRS label, okay, yeah, focus on inflammation, highly focused on inflammation, highly focused. Okay, now we know what we need to do when we find ourselves in a building that's water damaged, because we didn't stop living. We still travel, we still go to places, we still visit restaurants, we still encounter a lot of toxicity out in the world, But now we know because of what's in our toolbox, we know what we need to do when we get home to fix it, to help support our bodies.
so I love that you brought up faith because I think it's such an important component.
Yeah.
We have people that aren't faith-based in our community and there's just a difference of if you are if you believe that you are the owner of your own health and obviously we all should take I mean obviously you did so much to help your daughter, but there also has to be a component of faith or trust or hope that there's answers out there that you're trusting that things will work out for good because if
Mhm.
I see too many times where we'll have clients and patients where they're like, I can't sleep until I find my answer because I'm in control of my full destiny. And
Yeah.
there's nuance with that. But I think it's when you have a faith, there's hope and there's trust that sometimes you're not going to be in control and somehow it'll work out still.
Oh
And so
yeah. I think that's huge. And I love that you said that too, because I wasn't always so faithful. It's really been a retroactive response to just the beauty of how such a messy origin story has unfolded, for our family. It probably is based off of, how I grew up. I did grow up in a faith, but then I lost it, as many people do, going through life. And then we went through this, and I happened to go to a church, not a church of a faith that I grew up in. I went to a church with a friend of mine, and it was one of those churches where people stand up at the front and they'll pray for you. It's like a prayer partner situation. And I was like, I've never experienced this, but I'm all in. So I'm going to go up. And I asked them to pray for our family. And this person said they actually thanked God for what happened. And I was a little upset at first because I was like, I did not see this as a blessing at all. It seemed like why us? But then it clicked for me that I was like, and this is part of the control of your own destiny piece of the personality. But I just thought, you know what? Us discovering it didn't start or stop what was happening. Us discovering it gave us the opportunity to take some steps to figure out what we could control and what we couldn't control. And then together, my husband and I, became a unit again, and were able to make those decisions in support of our family and solidify the foundation that was kind of rocky for a time. But I just thought we don't have a choice about what happens to us sometimes, but we have a choice how we react.
yes.
And for me, choosing to go back and lean on faith was it helped me feel hopeful. It helped me feel empowered. It helped me feel like there was some greater good to pursue from this. And that, I just thought this story doesn't start and stop with us. We're not the first ones to experience this, and we won't be the last. But what if everything that my family went through and learned could help other people, shorten that timeline at least? That nobody should have to live in a house for 5 years, constantly asking questions of people who should be able to help you navigate something like this, and then just be told that you missed it, you know? And no, they didn't. Those people didn't know. They also. It's not as if they knew and withheld that information. They also weren't taught it. But we have to share what we experience so that people can then we can plant those seeds, and then people can do what they want with that. They can pursue it, they can ignore it, they can hide it away for a rainy day or whatever. But if we had experienced this and not shared what we've learned, then I know at least a handful of families who might still be suffering. And so, I just thought, I don't know, it just took me back to faith.
Yeah, I mean I can totally relate. I think it's in our pain, and as much as that pain is so bad that we would never wish that on everyone,
Yeah,
or anyone, that pain then becomes your passion of I don't want anyone to ever go through that again. And
that's
so
right.
by you going through that and having the advocacy even as a lawyer, you're able to help people that may not have had those resources or that support or knowledge, and you can help people get to a better place even faster. So I
Yeah,
think
that's the hope.
again, it's the greater good, and I totally
Yeah.
believe that. So, what made you? So, obviously, you had a really good career, right? So, you were a lawyer, you were doing the thing, but what made you then switch from the advocacy of your daughter to then saying, hey, maybe I'm going to do this other thing?
Well, I guess it takes me all the way back to like why I became a lawyer. And it was really just because I was like, hey, what's something I'm pretty good at studying. I've always made good grades. I'm pretty good at learning stuff, pretty good at communicating. And so I was like, I'll try this. I'll go be a lawyer. And I like money. So I was like, I'm gonna go make some and do this. But it was never like, oh, I have never been a litigator. So I have never been somebody who's like, some of their lawyers are just like champions for justice. They're out there fighting the good fight, helping people like directly. I've always worked for companies, multinational companies. And so not exactly doing the most direct to individuals, heartwarming, fulfilling work, right? I'm negotiating large deals, but like nobody's I'm not changing anybody's individual life by doing that. So once I started figuring out and untangling all of this for my own family, because I thought we can't just blindly go back into another house because this house, we did everything that we were supposed to do in the house that made us sick. We had all the inspections. We had, I mean, even more inspections than is typical. We had mold inspection. We had air quality inspection. We had all the inspections. We had all the HVAC people coming in and telling us year after year that everything was fine. We did everything we were supposed to do, except for we didn't actually actively engage with any of these people and ask them more questions because we just thought ignorantly, well, if they're here, they're going to tell us that there's a problem. We didn't actively pursue that. So then I thought, I'm a pretty smart, successful person. And if I don't know how to take care of my home or how to interact with some of the contractors that I'm paying really good money to provide me these inspections and level of support, then I bet that's a problem for other people too, you know? And then I realized that in my legal work, I do a lot of risk assessment and risk analysis. And I'm telling these executives, well, here's the risk of pursuing X, here's the risk of pursuing Y. Obviously, we can't just say the world of we have to have some risk appetite to move forward with the company, right? So it's the very same thing with your house. You can decide to never live in a home again, or you can decide to take some risk and live in a home that might end up having a sort of mold water damage issue, right? Somewhere in the middle is probably the comfort zone for most people.
Right.
And so, I just thought I can leverage this risk analysis, this ability to assess risk and to rationalize and to help people understand what is your risk tolerance and how can we help you live a life that you're comfortable with within that risk tolerance. That's the same thing that I do for these multinational companies, but I can do this for individual people and families as well. because it is not so cookie cutter as sometimes like Instagram and, the reels would have you believe.
Right.
It's not one size fits all. It's not that everybody has to take the nuclear approach that my family took when we didn't know any better, right? And it's not that it's impossible, and it's not that it's not accessible. It's just that some of the things that make it accessible or possible for people aren't really all that sexy. Some of it is maintenance for your home. Some of it is having difficult conversations before they have to become difficult. Some of it is not pretending like we're surprised that weather is going to happen when we're building homes in hot, humid climates. And, how can we address that up front before we hire people? How can we make sure that we handle our materials in a way that they're not going to get compromised while they're on the job site? How do we have those conversations? How do we discuss compensation? How do we discuss the fact that, if this happens, whose responsibility is it? And I was like, all of those things are in my wheelhouse, and all of those things are just very intuitive for me. And so being on the side of somebody who felt like I needed to reinvent the wheel, but then being on the other side of somebody going like, it's never really reinventing the wheel. It's just sort of like figuring it out and figuring out how you translate between two worlds. So the worlds between like builders or investigators or architects and just the general consumer who doesn't know anything about building science or what questions to ask. I figured out how to bridge that gap. And then because I'm a big advocate of doing your own research, but I'm also a big advocate of not conflating research with crowdsourcing, like sometimes it happens in Facebook groups and social media. I was like, I have to legitimize myself and also protect myself from a liability perspective by creating a company, limiting my personal liability as I'm providing people this type of support. But I was like, this guidance should be available for people, and it should be digestible for the normal person, like myself, but also more than just my own experience, because I've seen where it can be what I would consider unfair to a client if I was just saying, this is what I did, here's my roadmap, you should do the same thing. I would never impose my family's decisions on someone else. It is one option, but there are also many others. And so that's where I pursued all of these other building science certifications and groups. I'm a passive house builder, a building biology advocate, healthy materials advocate from the Parsons School of New York, and all these other options, because I thought I have to fully understand the industry that I'm helping guide other people through, so that you can understand the pain points, so that you can help people understand the areas where we could compromise, negotiate, and come to an agreement, so that both sides, can get what they need and what they want. Because the solution is not just everybody, people stop building because it's too risky, and people stop buying homes because it's too risky. That's not the answer.
Right. So how do we do it then? Let's say I wanted to move, and I could then work with you, and maybe you see my risk appetite or how sick we are and all of those nuances.
Yeah.
But let's say I don't want to build a home from scratch. So like, how would that work out if I were to work with you?
Yeah. Well, I would probably direct you to some of the realtors that have just gone through my certification program, because I think I'm an educator at heart. Like, this is my passion, because I'm just like, hey guys, everything is figure outable. If I can figure it out, you can figure it out. Of course you can. You're smart. I've had many people who have asked me that same question, and there just weren't really any programs from a certification of realtors perspective that made me comfortable saying, hey, if a realtor has this, X, Y, or Z certification, other than like building biology, I think, I've seen a couple of realtors who are certified from the Building Biology Institute, which gives you a really good baseline understanding of similar types of risk analysis. But there really just wasn't anything out there. So I created a certification program for realtors to explain to them, to show them all of the things that I know and how I would personally guide a client if I was working one-on-one with them, so that the realtors can do this and they can do it exponentially, tenfold in their practice. Because I just think that we have to share this information so that people can leverage it in their various areas of expertise. So that's what I would do. If somebody said, I can't build a home, but I'm looking to purchase a home, then I would say, I've got a link for certified healthy home realtors, and I would send them to that link so that they could work with one of those realtors. Otherwise, I would walk them through the client, if they didn't want to work with a realtor and did want to work with me, a very similar process to where we would analyze, what is your risk appetite? What are your limitations? Whether that's financially or emotionally, or, maybe you've got a zip code limitation, whatever those are. And we would work through those and assess, what are your wants and what are your needs and what are your nice to haves. And the One of the easiest examples of the wants, needs, and nice to haves is sometimes a zip code range is put in the need category, but I have a very, very sick family. And so then, we really test that and really push back and say, is that zip code actually a need, or is that a want, or is that a nice to have? Because you need a home that you can heal in. It might be inconvenient if you're in a different zip code, but is that a need at the expense of, the integrity of whatever the inventory is in that particular zip code? So that's just one way that I, walk people through that. And sometimes, sometimes they're very, very firm. No, that zip code is a need. Okay, that's a need. That is a need for you then. That wouldn't be a need for me. I would be willing to compromise on that, but this is not my risk analysis. This is theirs, right? So we go through the risk analysis, and then we would look at different listings. So they would say, I like this handful of listings, and we can analyze those virtually. We can look at them online, and we can identify, what are some higher risk areas, or what are some higher risk elements about this listing? When was it built? What is the cladding? Can you tell, does it have a crawl space? Where is the HVAC unit? Is it in a crawl space? Is it in an attic? Is it conditioned? Is it unconditioned? Many of these things you can see just from the listing photos. Some of them you can't, right? But some of them you can. And then there's some higher risk types of architecture or building that just sort of says, well, I don't know if you want to spend time looking at this house because, this is a higher risk. Stucco is one of those examples. Stucco is not always bad, but it is a higher risk type of cladding, especially in the South. Can be done very well, can be done very well in other places, but in the South, it tends to be a higher risk type of cladding. And so somebody who's very, very sick might just not want to spend time looking at a house like that if they've got, other houses. If it has a very complicated roof line, sometimes that can present a risk because every time there's a valley or a hip or an eave, that's a connection point. Any connection point has a propensity to not have that point be completely air and water tight. And so, that could present a risk. So we just talk through what are the risks, and we talk through what are the good things about it too. What are some great things about this home? It's positioned well. It's on the top of the hill versus at the bottom of the hill. It looks to have good drainage. It looks to be well maintained. The windows are nicely covered. It's got whole home gutters, point out the really good things about the home as well. But this helps them to be able to identify if they decide to put an offer on a house, for example, they go look at it, they don't see anything that's a glaring issue. That will help them to identify the weaker areas for their inspectors when they go have their inspectors take a look at the home. And then try to make sure that they're really, really looking at those areas that we've identified that are a little bit weaker. And I always try to guide people and tell them, we're not looking for a perfect house, so because sometimes there's an anxiety that, oh my gosh, the inspector found something. The inspector's always going to find something, and you should actually be worried if they don't, right? Because that means they probably didn't look as closely as you would like them to. And so I always just try to coach people, like, whatever you find in your inspection report is just a tool, and it's a tool for you to help you understand what are the things that you're going to attack or tackle or improve on this home once you purchase it. It's sort of your list of to-dos. And you get to decide what order that you do that in. But I help people to understand, like, this would be top priority. This might be 2, 3, 4, 5, kind of thing.
So you basically make the whole process of, and I want to talk about renting for a second, but
Yeah.
renting, buying, moving, basically just much more tactical and much more. I know you've seen on the internet or on, this ERMI guide or this thing that you have to cover all of these things, but in your instance, this is actually what may be the priorities first.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's my approach. And I do like to explain to people the full gamut of, hey, there are many, many, many risks. If that's what they need to go through to understand the full universe of the risks, we can spend our time doing that. I usually bill hourly, so it's probably not the best use of time and resources, but I'm like, we can do that if your nervous system needs it. I don't think that actually supports many people's nervous system to know all of those risks like that, But just to say, like, yes, it is very tactical and they are fully capable. And this is what I tell all my clients, you are fully capable of understanding. And I want them to use me as a test and like a safe place to push back, because I think this is one of the skills that many people they just don't necessarily need it in their day-to-day life, maybe, but I'm pretty used to it. Again, being coming from the legal background. But I'm like, I don't feel any kind of way about asking questions. And I don't feel any kind of way about asking questions over and over again until I get the answer. And in fact, it tells me more when I ask a question and somebody pushes back in a way that tells me that they don't want to answer that question. That's an answer, right? And so I try to kind of coach people and tell them that too. And I'm like, hey, if there's anything that I have said that you don't understand, tell me you don't understand it and we'll go back through it, or I'll provide you a resource where you can read more about it, or we'll talk about what you saw on Instagram versus what I've said and how you can come to your own determination of your truth, on that. And I think that that's super, super important, because one of the things that I never, never, never want to do is take away someone's autonomy to make a decision, or to say, I am the only one that can tell you what is the best decision for you, because I don't think that's true. I think that clients and individuals know what's best for themselves and their family. And I think that we have to relieve a little bit of the fear of not understanding maybe the residential real estate construction environment. But that's just learning, that's just teaching a little bit about a little science, a little physics, a little economics, a little business, you know, and then you can kind of figure it out. And every single one of my clients is capable. Every single person I've talked to, whether or not they're a client, is capable. And I think it's important that people know that.
Yeah, it's funny. So as I'm growing my business, I am reading a couple business books, like I always do. I think it's just I love learning too. There's this particular book that I've been revisiting. It's called Who Not How, and I totally think of you as the who and not how. So when a patient or client, they're always like, well, where do I move to, or where do I go, or where do I remediate? And then the question is, so then they try to learn everything, whether it's social media, on YouTube, and you don't have the subject matter expert hat to figure out, is this actually correct? Is this ideal?
Yeah.
Because even in the mold space, you and I know that there's so many different recommendations
Yep.
from different IEPs and different people. But if you were to hire a who, which is that's what the whole book is about, it's you can speed up the level of expertise by just hiring someone and then learning as much as you can and absorb as much as you can. And then you have some of that empowerment, and then you can go faster in the direction you need to. And I
Hmm.
think that's where, someone like you for the home part, which I probably, if we ever needed to buy a house, like I would probably lean on your expertise instead of me trying
Yeah.
to read all the books and trying to understand building science, because that's not something I ever want to be an expert in, right? But if I
Right.
could leverage your time and knowledge, then I could expedite my process without being so stressful. And
Yeah.
so I think that's the importance of, the role you play, and even the role I play in the health side of,
Yeah.
okay, I know you're trying to learn mold illness through a Facebook group, but some of the recommendations may not be correct or ideal
Yeah.
for your situation. Because I think, like you said, I love it. It is very personalized. So some
Mhm.
people do just hear from IEPs, you got to throw away everything. But do you know their nervous system,
Right.
right? Like the
You know
trauma
their
they've been
body.
through.
Yeah.
And if you
Yeah.
don't know that, to say to somebody that struggles with letting go of things or worthiness or something, then to
Mhm.
say you just got to throw away everything, that may cause a deeper wound and trauma than
Yeah.
even going through this whole experience. So I think, like you said, I think it's so important, this personalization. I want to ask you a quick question. So, one, what was it about your house that then inevitably made the mold? And then secondly, the biggest pushback I always get is this is, I mean, like yourself from the story you shared of your
Yeah.
own family's journey, it's expensive. And so then people are like, this is a rich man's disease. I can never get better. All the homes in where I live are moldy because it's such a humid area. So for people that may not have as much resources, maybe they can't buy a new home or they can't build, but maybe they're renting. What are some of the recommendations you would give those people to?
My heart goes out to those people because it's a tough place. There is no one answer or one way. I think that really grounding in what you can control, and that's going to be different for everybody. And maybe running through that same analysis of what is a need and what is a nice to have. For example, if it might be very uncomfortable for a period of time to go live with a family member, if you have that option, it might be very uncomfortable, but is it possible? Where you could potentially save some money, you could potentially get out of an environment that's not conducive to your health or to supporting your healing. And I think it's also important to remember that our home environments and the need for, completely pristine, hospital grade, indoor air is not the goal. There is an in between, and sometimes it just has to be good enough. And so if you're in a rental situation, this is the piece that is the very unsexy part, but maintenance and cleaning, like clean like a mad person if you can. Again, not everybody has that capacity, particularly people with chronic illness. Maybe they're not well enough, don't have the energy to clean their indoor environment as much. But if you can change the air filters in your HVAC frequently, if you're concerned about the integrity of that system, maybe you could try to change it every month, every couple weeks, even if it's not technically your responsibility, even if it's an apartment complex or, the landlord's responsibility, can you do it? would you do it? If it could support your health. Not running, if the HVAC system is the compromise, not running the system if you can, if it doesn't increase humidity, that would cause, other knock-on issues. If you've got windows that you can open, if you can stay out of the house as frequently as you can, don't wear shoes inside, vacuum, don't rewear your clothes, wash your bedding frequently. I mean, these are just things that if you just think about, why does mold and mycotoxins make us sick? We have to protect our skin because this is our largest organ. And this is how, sometimes mycotoxins that are floating around in the air can enter our body through our skin, through our nose, through our mouth. And then, we're also thinking about bacterias and things that are in the soil, things that can come in on the bottom of our shoes. So are we going to create perfection by cleaning a lot? No. Are you going to capture more of what is then not going to enter your body? Yes. And then might that have to be enough until you can find a situation where you can have a cleaner indoor environment? Maybe so. And I think that sometimes we let perfection be the enemy of the good. And I think that that can be a really tough space to be in mentally, because it really kind of, to me, goes to, you are worth it. You as an individual are worth pursuing health in whatever small incremental steps that you can. And maybe you can't do any of that, but maybe you can adjust how you eat or what you eat, whether or not those things contribute to inflammation. Could you limit inflammation from your diet and not limit the things that are causing inflammation in your air? Yeah. Is that going to completely heal you? I don't know. But will that hurt? No, that'll reduce one of the things that is causing the inflammation. So I think really taking an assessment of what you can control versus what you can't, and then doing the things that are maybe unsexy, just even if it's a small incremental improvement, those incremental improvements add up just as quickly as the negative toxins do, right? So that's what I would say, to kind of take control in an environment where you don't fully control it. Now, as far as our house, the issue was the HVAC, which is one of the most common issues in Texas. And it was kind of the perfect storm. It was an older house. And at some point, not we did not, but someone else before us, decided that this house was not cool enough. And so somebody sold them a very big HVAC unit, the biggest one that they could find, I guess. But it was oversized for the house, which resulted in just a proliferation of excess condensation in the unit, which blew off into the plenum. The plenum has insulation at the bottom of it, and then plenty of dust, and so all of those things are food sources for mold. And so it was a proliferation of mold inside the HVAC system that we couldn't see. And when we first started seeing our functional medicine doctor, she recommended that we look into those UV lights that you put into your system. So I was like, yeah, okay, sure, why not? And I hired a company to come put those in, because you have to actually drill them into the plenum. And this is just the perfect example of how I just can't believe that nobody told us anything, but also we didn't ask because we didn't know what to ask. So we bought these we bought these lights to go insert into the system. They went and did. And then after all of our mold inspections, we found and we saw the whole plenum was completely compacted with mold. Like there was no, those lights don't do anything to address mold that's already there, right? And so I was like, really would have been nice if those guys who actually drilled into our plenum and saw that it was compacted with mold, would have told us that it was compacted with mold, rather than just like going and doing their job and saying nothing more. But obviously that did not help. So, but yes, it was an oversized HVAC unit in a hot, humid, unconditioned attic in the South, 1980s house. Unfortunately, perfect environment for mold.
So do you think HVAC units are one of the biggest places of mold?
Definitely in the South. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I think that there's a whole lot of factors that go into it, and including where the HVAC unit is placed. And it's just so if you just think very simply about the HVAC being the lungs of the home, because that's where all of your air is pushing and pulling. It's coming through every air, and all the air in the building envelope is coming through that HVAC system. And then, sometimes in places, because I have I see clients nationwide, so I deal with a lot of clients that also have like crawl spaces and things, and their units and their ducts are in the crawl space, but the crawl space is literally a space that you would have to crawl into. Like you can't stand up in it. You have to like scooch under it, And I'm like, just from a like human perspective, if you buy a house with a unit that an inspector is saying, I can't inspect it because I can't see it, do you think it's ever been maintained? Probably
Right.
not. That's probably too high of a risk for somebody who has an illness, with an inflammatory illness where there might be a mold issue there. So that's like another one of the risk areas that we talk about. But the HVAC units they are potentially problematic because it is the cold air, which is distinct from the hot outside air for a reason, right? We want our inside to be different than our outside, but we're running that system usually through a super unideal environment. Either that's a vented, unconditioned attic, or it's the crawl space that's right next to all the dirt and all the humidity and all the stuff that's coming up from the ground. And then it has all these connection points. And just, coming from a manufacturing background, I'm like, if it moves, it breaks. This is just sort of a rule in life. If it moves, it breaks. And so if there's a connection point, that's a risk area. So everywhere the ducts are connecting to the plenums, to the unit, every time it's changing, every time the ducts are bending, these things are all risk areas. And it doesn't mean that we stop using HVAC systems. It means that we try to design them and we try to make sure that they're installed in a way that they can actually be maintained. And you can keep eyes on these risk areas and you can just make sure that they don't create problems.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Going back to what you said about, doing what you can with what you have,
Yeah.
I think that is so important. When I first joined the mold illness space, there was so much focus on mold illness, but not on the diet. And I just, I would put on my hat of, well, these people need to really clean a lot because, like you said, dust can be a food source for mold. So then if you're cleaning enough, there's less dust and then there's less food for this mold. And so
Hmm.
that can improve a lot of the illness that you might be exposed to for, like you said, is this the skin and breathing it in.
Yeah.
But if you're eating really bad foods or eating inflammatory foods, super high, ultra processed foods, and that makes anybody tired, and then how are you going to have the energy to even clean up or to have less? I know brain fog can absolutely be caused by mold illness, but if
Hmm.
you're eating ultra processed foods that are so not ideal for you, that will also exacerbate the brain fog. And
Yeah.
then you have zero desire, zero motivation, zero energy to do any of that cleaning. And so you're just perpetuating this illness. And so I love that you approach even the environment side with a lot of this holistic health because that's the best approach. If we have seen people that do have CIRS and undiagnosed, they go on a really strict elimination diet of just meat and you see a lot of healing. Sure, it won't get them to the, A level of health, but they have so much healing. Maybe they'll have another hit of a bad moldy place and then their health isn't the same even with the clean diet. But
Yeah.
then we know now, hey, it's not your diet anymore. Now we need to look into your environment because the diet is not doing what it used to for you. So we see the gluten thing of that's the big one. So now we know when someone's like, I'm super sensitive to gluten, that is a red flag for us of, oh, this person may have CIRS or have
Mm.
an inflammatory response
Yeah.
because they're just, and they're not celiac, but they're super, super sensitive to gluten.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because like each member of my family has a sort of a different reaction
Yeah.
to even inflammatory foods,
Okay.
And a lot of times, like, because my kids are now 10 and 7, they were 5 and I think 2.5, 3 when we moved out. And my whole goal with them is that I don't want them to have to learn this. Like I've had to learn this. I mean, it's turned our lives upside down, the things that we've had to learn and how we've had to adjust how we live, in a good way. It's all for the better, but it's different. It was very different.
Right.
We were busy. We weren't prepared to turn our lives upside down. So I want it to be very normal and natural for them. And so one of the things that I'm super proud of is just that we approach it without fear, And so like they will walk to a restaurant, for example, and the very first thing that they do without prompting is they look up because they're
Yep.
looking at the air unit, and so they look up and they're like, Mom, that looks that shouldn't be there, And I'm like, you're right. And then I ask him like, do you think that should we go find a different place to eat? You think our bodies would be happier if we went somewhere else to eat? And a lot of times they'll be like, yeah, I think so. I think that we should. Or they might be like, no, we really want this food, but we can eat outside or,
Right.
like
Okay.
whatever. But I'm just like, we don't have to be afraid of it because we're capable of making choices. Once we are educated to be able to be aware, then you can make a choice, and I want them to be empowered in their choices, and I don't want them to be fearful, and I don't want them to think that they're broken or that there's anything wrong with them at all. It's just that we have been very, very fortunate to be able to determine what is the roadmap for each of our bodies. And now we can make choices, and I have no doubt that once they grow up and they're, completely independent and making their own choices, that they'll probably make some poor choices and they'll probably suffer the consequences of inflammation again. But the good news is that they'll be able to identify this is not normal. Because that was one of the things that my husband and I struggled with, is that we were like, there's nothing wrong with us. This is normal. Constantly being bloated, the brain fog, the irritation, all this is normal. This is very normal for us. And then once we started relieving some of those symptoms, we were like, oh, wow, this is not normal. This is just how we have been dealing with our lives, this whole time. And so I think it's a big gift that I'm happy that we were able to learn as a family what is normal. And, even with, I'm probably the one that lags on, really taking care of myself as much as the rest of the family still. I'm working on that, but a part of it is because I feel better than I've ever felt, even though my labs say I've still got room to go and, much, much more room to improve. I'm like, I feel great, which might tell you how poorly I felt before, but I feel like I feel great, like I run a side business, I have a full-time job, with kids, I'm on board of a nonprofit, what I mean? Like, there is no lack for energy for the things that I'm passionate about, that I want to pursue. And so, but it is encouraging to note still, though, that it's like, hey, I can make even more improvements. I could feel even better. And maybe when I'm 50, I'll be feeling the best of my life. I mean, who knows?
I love that I have this channel and platform that I can educate people with. Guys, sometimes it's beyond the diet. Like, yes, absolutely work on the diet. It will absolutely support your immune system and strengthen your body. But if that's not enough, then looking into environment is so key. And we see so many people suffering from CIRS, at least in our practice, when the diet
Sure.
doesn't work enough. There is such a quick flip where some people feel empowered, like, okay, now I know what to do. I have answers after 20 years or 30 years of autoimmune something illness, this and that, going around different doctors and nothing working. But
Yeah.
then there's other people that now fear is everywhere. So now they are scared to go into any building because
Yeah.
I see mold or I feel mold. I feel it hit my face and now my eyes are burning or I have no energy. And it's just, and so that's why we created a mind body program, because our clientele needed it, because
Yeah.
it was so quick that now they fear everything out there. And so I love that you are challenging and telling your children it's okay. We see the mold because we as humans did live with mold. It's just maybe there's excess toxins around the way that we're building our homes, the HVAC units, etc. But it's this balance of we have to still live our lives.
Yeah.
And we see it even in the diet space where people become orthorexic of I can't eat at a certain restaurant. They use seed oils or they
Mm.
use this or that. And then they become like, I'm just gonna stay at home because my environment's safe. I'm just gonna eat the meat that I know that's safe that I cooked. If you're in a period of true healing and that protocol, so be it. But I want people to go then live their lives. Because what is the
Yeah.
point of health if you're going to live in your little box of
Yes.
safety and
Yes.
not live your life? And that is so sad to me too. And so I love the way that you are balancing that we cannot live by fear, because when we live by fear, that's when we let the mold then control us. And
Hmm.
we let our nervous system get hypersensitive and triggered by everything outside of this world. And so I love everything you shared about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I fully agree. And I think even the words that we use are important, and the things that we surround ourselves are important. And I think if people just kind of take a minute to assess what is triggering my nervous system, once I pick up that phone and I go to that Facebook group that's all about mold, how do I feel? Am I already scared and nervous before I even read the first entry? Maybe it's
Right.
time to like silence that, just because the words, the things that we surround ourselves, the things that we consume, whether it's like actually eating food or just like taking in information, that affects us. It affects us, and it affects us differently at different stages in our life. And I'd even had somebody at one point try to, and not for any negative reason, but they gave me this label of a mold survivor, and I just kind of challenged them, and I said, I don't label myself as that. I don't label myself as anything associated with mold at all. And it's not at all because I'm forgetting what happened to us. Obviously, I'm living with what happened to us every day, but I am a mom. I am a daughter. I'm a sister. I'm a wife. These are the things that I am. I experienced mold, but that is not who I am, you
Right.
know. And I think that's incredibly important for people to remember that we are not what we experience. We are who we are.
I love that so much. And it just made me think of when we were talking about the labeling. There are so many people in our practice that have come in with a diagnosis of major depression or bipolar. And every single one, I will tell you, every single person that we have experienced that has colitis has CIRS or mold illness. And then every single person that has been diagnosed with bipolar in their previous medical journey also
Mm-hmm.
has CIRS or mold
I
illness.
believe it.
So now I want to challenge people of like, really, you're just the label of that's what you are, and so now you need to maintain it or be in remission, or your body is trying to protect you with whatever you're getting exposed to, and if you
Yeah.
can alleviate your health with removing the bigger things, then maybe
Yeah.
you won't even have that label. And not that the label is wrong or right, it's just I don't want people to just settle with status quo because I
Yeah.
think we can always strive for better and strive for healing and still have hope. And I think that the way that we view the world, like you said, one thing that I have seen in our practice is the people that are on YouTube all day long and then read the comments or that are in the Facebook groups, the people that heal are no longer going to be in those groups because now they've healed. Why would they stay in a mold illness group? But if
Yeah.
you look at the groups, they're always saying that I'm not healing, this is not good, it's not working. But if you healed, you move on and you're not going to be in those groups until, unless you become an advocate or something. So we actually, in our practice, we recommend that people stop looking and for a
I
short period of
agree.
time while they're on a protocol that they turn off social media
Yeah.
because fear sells. Fear gets the eyeballs on social media. And so if you can turn it off while you're healing and focus on the things that make you laugh, that make you have hope, and that instill inspiration, like those are the things I want people to focus on. And I'll tell people, I want you to watch comedy all day long. Like that's the only thing you can look at. And
Love
it's, I know
that.
it sounds crazy, but it's if you then start questioning your protocol, or maybe I'm not doing this, or I haven't hired this person right, or I'm not doing this thing right, and you
Yeah,
start putting doubt in your mind, well, that's like letting the enemy win, right?
it
The
is.
enemy of whatever the challenge you're dealing with. So
Yeah.
I appreciate so much again
I love
the
that.
way that you are supporting the environmental side because just being fully candid, it is the hardest part of our job. It's then when recommending, well, where do I live?
Hmm.
It's like I don't really know either.
Yeah, I agree. And I work with many, you know, people in the medical field, functional medicine doctors and things, because it's you spend so much time supporting your clients'
Yeah.
bodies, your patients' bodies. If the home is the missing key, then they need some support and education around that piece and help to understand what they can control there. And oftentimes it's like chicken and the egg, you know, like sometimes I get people before they've gone on their healing journey and I'm constantly recommending, you know, that they talk to people who are mold literate type practitioners. Don't feel overwhelmed. I'm talking to people who are listening now. Don't feel overwhelmed in that you have to do everything at once. You just sort of you need to just go with your gut about what you feel comfortable handling. And then once you've got that handled, then you can, you know, expand into other areas to continue to optimize. But you don't have to be perfect and you don't have to do everything at once in order to get better.
Christina, thank you so much for your time. For a mom or, parent that is going through what you had gone through, what would be a first step that you would recommend? And then any type of encouragement for, the journey ahead for them,
Yeah.
or if they're in the middle of it.
Absolutely. I would say the very first step is just to believe in your ability. And wherever you believe that ability comes from, I believe it's from God, but believe in your ability to figure things out. You know, look back at your life and recall all the difficult times that you've figured things out that you didn't know. Think all the way back to childhood before you knew how to sit up, and now you're sit up every day without thought, you know. Um, Go back to all of those things, all of the things in your life, and remember that you're capable and remember that you are worth it as an individual, even outside of your role as a mom or wife, or if you are any of those things to other people, just as an individual, remember that you are worth saving and you are worth healing. And if it just takes some adjustments to the way that you live your life, if it takes adjustments to diet, it takes some awareness about your environment and your surroundings, those are things you're capable of learning. And give yourself grace and remember that you're not always going to ascend straight up the mountain. There's going to be dips and valleys, and you know, sometimes things are going to be uncomfortable and hard. And that's exactly when you just put your head down and you just keep going one step in front of the next. I think also just from a woman's perspective, but also a lawyer's perspective, just always keep in your head, if you are asking people questions and these are the right people that you can rely on to help guide you, then they are never going to make you feel bad about asking those questions. They're never going to make you feel stupid about asking those questions. And if they do, then you can just gracefully tell those people to have a good day and move on to other people. I think that's super, super important. As far as first steps goes, it depends on where you are in your process. I think that if you're most comfortable assessing your health fully and taking a deep dive, I think that is time and money well spent because you can get your roadmap to success for your individual body. Every single person is different. And so I think that would be a great first step to then figuring out, well, what do I need to do for my environment or for my health in order to support myself, given my toolbox and my roadmap.
Okay, thank you so much. Where can people find you if they wanted to even do the realtor certification? I'm assuming that even as a potential homeowner, that may be beneficial, but if you could just share where people can find you.
Probably so. Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Instagram, Conscious Healthy Home, and also my website, conscioushealthyhome.com. On the website, I've got all kinds of guides and blogs and just little snippets of information. I have all my favorite resources. If you're somebody who wants to dive deep into resources, there's a lot of resources there for you. And I think my favorite thing about the information that I put on both my website and on Instagram is that it's 100% science, non-fear based. And so you're not going to go there finding a lot of the same information and conversations that you might see in some of the Facebook groups, not all, but some. It's all just information that's completely unbiased, ready for you to digest and then to make your own determination about whether or not that's a role or a path that you want to take.
Well, thank you so much. I'll put all your information in the show notes. Thank you for
Okay.
sharing your story. And I could
Thank
totally
you.
see your heart and I could relate to you in so many levels. I love it. I'll be reaching out to you more often, but thank you so much again for your time.
Absolutely. One day I'll tell that story without crying. Today's not
Okay,
the day, but
I get
thank you
it.
so much,
I
Judy.
tried very hard not to tear up with you, but thank you so much.
I appreciate your time. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, guys, I hope that this conversation gives you a lot of hope, empowerment. It gives you the fight to keep going. Illness, chronic illness, whatever you want to label illness, is not easy. And on some days, when the pain is too hard, when the times feel too tough, it is easy to feel like letting go or giving up or just being and existing without feeling like you have more to fight for. But there is always room to fight. There is always room for hope. And if you are in darkness, I always recommend finding people that can give you light. Chronic illness is never easy, but there is a way out. And I hope that our channel, with the education, the tactical skills we give you, allows you to know that there is a fight. And as long as you don't lose hope, there's always a way out. Sometimes it's not going to be perfect. Oftentimes it's going to be messy. But if you truly fight for healing, there is possible healing. We have seen so many incredible stories of people healing, even nervous system regulation, where somebody may always have panic attacks or anxiety attacks, and then going through the nervous system retraining or mind body healing, they no longer go through that, even on a carnivore diet. I hope that you find healing, and more importantly, that you search for healing and you fight for it. Having a diagnosis or a label is not always the end all answer. Sure, we can use a medication temporarily or a band aid, but what if those band aids don't work long term? The goal is to get to root cause as much as possible and to be able to give your body resilience, allow your immune system to get stronger, and most importantly, allow your mind to be strong enough to say, no, that's fear, and no, that's not something I'm going to believe in, and I'm always going to be a fighter. I hope that you are always filled with tenacity and grit and that you have the power and desire to fight for healing. All right, guys, make sure to eat a lot of meat. Take care of your bodies because it is the only place you have to live. I will talk to you later. Bye, guys.